it's also really helpful to look on the job boards for the next role that you want to have, and sort of reading them and seeing, okay, what are the specific skill sets or experiences that they're looking for, and just making sure, okay, how do I get those skills and experiences in my current job?
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Careers in Finance. I'm here to have a little bit of a walk down memory lane with one of my wonderful friends that is an accomplished woman in finance, Sharron Xiao. Sharon, welcome.
Thank you.
So Sharon and I went to school together way back in the day for university. And we took pretty similar but different paths. Sharon went down the CA, now CPA path. But she's had a really, really interesting career path in that she started off in a structured way. And then now you've gone through more kind of like the startup side and whatnot. And so I think our listeners would love to hear about your career and how you've made the decisions to be where you are. So I guess the only question that I want to open up this entire discussion with is, how did you get your interest in finance? Where'd you get it from? Did you get it from your parents? Did you go to it for school? Like from high school, did you have an idea of what you already wanted to pursue?
That is a great question. So I think I really stumbled into this because your decisions on what you want to be when you grow up all starts in high school, when you have to pick, what courses do I want to take? Am I going to continue with my sciences and math courses, or do I not need to take them anymore? And so, like for me, I think what I really liked was I did like sort of the numbers and analysis side of it, but I also really enjoyed the people side of things too. So for me, I wanted a career that would sort of allow me to use both of these skills. And so, not really knowing that much about the field, I kind of just blindly said, okay, I'm going to do business. Let's go and apply to some business programs. And it's really like after starting university and talking to people that have the different jobs and have different career paths, that I really started to learn, okay, what are the possibilities with a business degree, and what can I do with my career? Because really, like, even I think in high school and even in the beginning parts of university, we only know of very few professions. It's like, oh, I can be an accountant. And then outside of that, it's like, what professions are available in the finance field? There are so many that people don't know about. And I didn't learn about those till much, much later. And so I think I chose accounting not necessarily because I was like, oh, I'm really like passionate about it, this is what I want to do. It was because it's like one of the only professions in the field that I was really sure and aware of at the time, versus the others.
I remember, so in high school, this is a long time ago, but it's fun to think about the fact that as like a 15-year-old, kids are kind of under the pressure of, you're going to go to school for this and then you need to find a job. And then you're going to have to start paying your bills and living your life. But in high school, were you already thinking like, okay, after university, either I'm going to pursue further education and like delay reality, or I have to have like internships. I have to ultimately get a job at the end. Did you already have that mindset when you were in high school, thinking like university has to lead to a job? And so for like, at least for me, I was like, okay, well, arts, English and whatnot, that's really fun, but I'm probably not going to be a journalist. And then on the sciences side, I was like, I do not have the stomach to be a doctor. And so I thought, oh, well, by process of elimination, this seems most practical. Did you think that way too in high school early on?
Yeah, I definitely think so, because it is like kind of an Asian immigrant
It totally is.
parents mindsets, right? Like your parents come to the country for a better opportunity for you. So it's like, I've got to make the most of this opportunity, and I need to be able to make a living, and get a job and be successful in life so that my parents' sacrifices will ultimately be worth it. So I think that message was kind of drilled into me even growing up. So in my mind, I was always sort of driven by that. And so I never really considered, I mean, there's like kind of certain professions that, the Asian immigrant families tend to consider. And definitely those were kind of top of mind for me as I was starting out, in terms of figuring, okay, what is it that I want to do? I'm obviously going to pursue a degree that it's going to afford me job opportunities. And so that I think that was a big driving force behind it, rather than sort of, it coming from, oh, I'm super passionate about this thing, so I'm going to go and pursue it. It's like, what is like the most practical approach to a career choice that is going to ensure that I have success in life? So that was definitely uh, the Asian immigrant mindset, if you will.
Yeah, and I had the same thing, and the whole idea of like, okay, well, I'm not going to be a doctor, maybe. And I wanted to for a long period of time. I was like, maybe I'll go into law, but at the same time, it's a law degree is not an undergraduate degree; that's like a master's degree. So I figured, well, if I do an arts degree or a science degree, and I decide not to do the law degree, like where am I going in between? But in our undergraduate program, my whole thing was I still didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. So I wanted to do something which seemed to make sense to me at the time, which was let's go where everybody wants to go. Like everybody wants to try this like investment banking thing. People must have researched it. There's like it seems really popular. So that's where I'm gonna go. And then so luckily it worked out for me. Like I did my first internship with Brookfield, and that was more of like a fund accounting role in their private equity fund that was starting up. But then afterwards, my main one was at Ontario Teachers in portfolio management. Then I went into investment banking, and then here I am today, several years down the line. But the really popular path that I thought was a very like academic, it was really challenging path, and I thought was kind of intimidating, was the path that you went down, which is to go with one of the big audit firms and then go through that entire process, write the exam, get the designation. Tell us how that path was, and then after you finished your years in audit, you moved on from being at PwC, and then going on to your next role. What was that like?
Yeah. So I think I really found out about this career path because I had friends that went down the same path, and so it seems like, okay, these people are doing relatively well. This job seems to be, and highly regarded, and you can make a good living for yourself. And so I was like, okay, let me pursue this. This sounds like something that I could do. I could potentially be really interested or good at this. And so I really was like, okay, I'm going to go and do this. So I'm the type of person that's like, okay, once I make a decision, I want to follow through with it. And then so that decision was kind of made. And sort of at the end of high school, it's like, okay, I'm going to go and apply for universities that best support this path. And our school really was like very accounting heavy because a lot of the people, even in years ahead of us, everyone's trying to get like, an internship with the big four, with our co-op terms. Those were like very highly regarded jobs. And it was, to be honest, they did a lot of campus recruiting and marketing to push the profession in
Yeah,
our school.
heavy
So,
recruitment.
yeah. And so I was like, okay, great. This is, so that's kind of what really motivated me
I
to
still
want to get
remember
a
the
job.
guy's name, Keith Kwan. Remember,
Yes.
he was that Deloitte guy, and he was so visible on campus all the time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so like, the students in sort of the upper years, a lot of them who were like well known
Hmm.
in school had jobs with the big four. And so it's like, okay, well, yeah, if I want to be successful, I should try and get an internship with the big four as well. And so that was like my goal coming into the process, and going to the networking events, and it like coming into university is like so fresh. It had no skills, like no interviewing skills, like barely knew what I was doing. It was just like, okay, your whole life, you're like, oh, just, do well in school, get good marks, and then, things will kind of fall into
That's
place
something
later
you're
on.
really good at doing, though. Like those of you listening, of course, don't know Sharon as well as I do, but Sharon is super academically smart, like very high achiever. You're always getting the top marks. So it's like when your job is being a student, you certainly did that very well.
Yeah, yeah. So I would say being in business, that matters, but only to a certain extent. So it's important that you do well, but actually, I think versus some other fields, being like academically strong is only one piece of the puzzle. It's
Yeah.
like you really have to have super strong like soft skills, like people skills, communication skills, even being able to go to networking events and being comfortable in that kind of environment took a lot of practice and like
Yeah.
pushing myself outside of my comfort zone and sort of learning these soft skills that aren't taught in school. And so yeah, it was kind of a wake up call for me when I went into university. So I would say like when getting a job with these companies, like it's actually the soft skills that you have that stand out more, and that'll and that will make you stand out because once you pass a certain threshold, like yeah, you do well in school, but it's like the other things and the impression that you make on these recruiters that will set you apart.
Yeah. And I find that generally, so think about ourselves when we were, I don't know, graduating university or like just finishing up the first job. Think about like how we, thought of networking and what we were at those large events versus what we would be today. It's like such a huge, huge disparity. I feel like even like myself, I'm like a fairly social person, but when I think about like attending a networking event when I was like 22 versus today, oh, it's just like I just look back and I cringe a bit. But it's a huge learning process, and I think it's really like the first transition out of your very first full time job into the next chapter that really helps like develop you in that way. Um, what was your time at PwC like? How many years did you stay, and then how did you find your next opportunity afterwards?
Yeah. So we had three co-op terms when we were in school. So I did three terms with PwC. That was actually really helpful, which means I only had to go through the job search process when I was in school, and I didn't actually have to find a full-time job when I graduated, which was like super lucky because I know like I have friends and others that didn't just like go and have their co-op terms with the same company and had to go through that full-time job search process. So it was like, okay, we could get experience, and you get paid for the work that you're doing, which helps pay off like, any student debt that you could have accumulated throughout the time. And then you start like right away with full-time job. So there's like, less stress of, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to find a job? Because you've already,
Already
you
got
already have
one.
that experience under your belt. And then what really helps kind of with the CPA process in general is that all the time that you spend at the job in co-op, it counts towards your experience. And then so I was able to, just even starting at the firm, I was like a year ahead of everybody else that would have graduated and just started right after they graduated. So I think the co-op program, especially in business, is like super valuable for that. And then in business, like everybody now wants some sort of experience. It's like really hard to get your first job if you don't have any experience. And so being a part of the co-op program really helped with that. And then being in a company like PwC, they hire a lot of new grads and student co-op students and things like that. And so I think it was a great place to build my network, to learn from like peers because there's a whole group of us, right? And then you're learning sort of how to do things the proper way because there's very established processes. They put you through rigorous training. It's very sort of like hierarchical and
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
more the environment that I am in now, right? But I think it was the great learning opportunity for sure because okay, this is sort of how things are done the right way as you're working with clients at PwC, and then you're talking to um, you know clients that are in the industry. So say people at all levels in the company that normally you wouldn't be able to talk to in other jobs. So there's a lot of exposure to different industries, different processes that different companies have, and so just in general, I think great learning opportunities with the work, with the training that they put in place, having access to a network of peers, and even people that are like older that have left the firm and then been in industry. So just overall, I think if you want a profession or a job in the accounting field, and even like in other finance related fields, like starting your career in a big four, I think is a really it's a really valuable opportunity in terms of a career start. So I enjoyed it, even though you do work long hours.
It was very tough. Yeah. I remember if
And
you were on a
especially, yeah,
winter co-op term, it would just be like death because it was
yeah,
very busy season. But also I felt like it was probably nice to have the continuity in terms of structure. Like, for example, when you're in high school, there's structured curriculum, exams, SATs, whatever. And then in university, it's the same process. You need to complete that degrees, midterm finals, yada, yada, yada. And then for people that don't have the internships and just go and find a full-time job, they completely lose that structure. But if you're interested in career in finance or business generally, and you start, if you're lucky enough to start with an audit firm, one of the big four, you're already going into another structured kind of chapter of your life where you have to have your audit hours, you have to go and write your designation exam, you have all of these peers that are introducing you to kind of like next steps and then taking you through clients. So it's nice to have that structure um, at the very early stage of your career. But then
Yeah,
after
yeah, I
that, like, how did
totally
you find
agree.
your next job?
Yeah, yeah. I think having that structure earlier in your career helps you to learn versus say like if I had joined a startup environment like right away
Yeah.
outside of school, I don't think it would have been as great for my career growth as starting at PwC because like in the startup world, generally like your finance function is one of the last functions that you invest in. And then so there's no structure, there's no processes. You're like building everything from the ground up. And if you have no idea what good looks like, it's really hard for you to go through that. And so I think just, especially when you're early on in your career, you want some structure and you want mentors that you can learn from and people that will support you in your learning versus like a very, very unstructured environment. And so it really kind of depends on sort of your career goals. Obviously, if you're going the more entrepreneurial route, getting startup experience is great. But if you're like, okay, I want to sort of, potentially be a CFO one day, actually getting your start in sort of a more structured environment is really, really valuable.
And so okay, so this is going to anticipate the future, but you've been in a CFO role. But between that role and audit, take us through how you found your first job outside of PwC and where you've been since and like how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. Uh, so one of the things that we've already talked about is so it's starting at a big four is a great way to start your career, and I think other companies out there realize that recruiters realize that, and so there is a very high demand for individuals that kind of went through the audit route. So I left when I was like a second year, right after my second year, senior year, like that busy season after my second senior year. And so, and sort of when I was making the decision to leave, I talked to a whole bunch of people because it was like, okay, well, if I want to leave, where do I want to leave to go to? Because there's so many different career paths outside of the big four. And then there's of course like recruiters reaching out. And so you're talking to, your friends, your peers, other people that have left before you. You're trying to find, okay, what are they doing now? Would that be something that I'm interested in? At the same time, there's recruiters like reaching out to you very actively, feeding you job opportunities. So it's like, I think that is a really important cusp or decision point for people because like what you choose at that point is will direct kind of like where you start to go because really like you start to specialize in certain areas as you progress in your career. And so for me, in considering all of the job opportunities, like I talked to people who like went to on one side of things, people who worked in internal audit in banks. And then I decided, okay, I'm not interested in that. So that's great for some people. It's very structured. You have like generally decent work life balance. Um, and it's more similar to what people were doing like in the big four, right? It's just in industry. And there's other people who went into reporting roles in industry as well, which is like, okay, if you're really interested in sort of the technical accounting aspects of accounting, that's really suitable for you. And then for me, actually, those weren't sort of the areas that were interesting to me. Like to me, I always sort of liked sort of creativity, innovation. I don't necessarily, in terms of a lot of structure, like that was fine for me. But I did appreciate sort of the startup environment that is really interesting to me. It's like you get to be involved in the whole business. You get to kind of take a company's journey from like cradle to grave, and you get to own processes because you're building out a function that doesn't currently exist. And it was just like really exciting to me. And then sort of the people that you're working with, usually there's a lot of like young people in startups, right? And so it's much less structured, much more like usually younger, um, more sort of less like formal processes and things like that. And so and there's a lot of like sort of creativity and innovation that doesn't always exist in other industries, like say for example banking, where it's very like heavily regulated, rules driven, which is more suitable to some people. But for me, I'm like, okay, this is really interesting to me, so I'm gonna take this opportunity. And so it's actually a company called Top Hat that I
Yeah,
worked
I remember.
for PwC, and it was somebody from Top Hat, their recruiting team, that reached out to me about the opportunity. And just going through that process and talking to the people that worked there, it really drew me to that opportunity, just because it was so different than what I was used to. And I was like, I think I would actually really like this. And the people that I met were like amazing. So I was like, okay, I think I want to work here. And so really that's what kind of drove my decision.
And then what did you do at Top Hat? And how was it? Because it's quite different from what you did at PwC, right? PwC, you were mainly doing the audit function, getting those hours in. What did you do at Top Hat? And you were there for several years. So take us through how you developed professionally in those years.
Yeah, so I was at Top Hat for almost 6 years, so quite a long time. And
Oh, wait,
actually, it was a bit
tell
of
us about
a
what type of company Top Hat is.
so Top Hat is an educational software company, and so when I started, it was like maybe about 50 or so employees when I joined, and when I left, it was like about 350 or so throughout the 6 years. So it grew rapidly. The company grew like 10 times in size from a revenue perspective. So just like being a part of that journey was super exciting. Um, and yeah, so when I joined Top Hat, it was a bit of a culture shock to me, actually, because it was so different than PwC. Like PwC is very formal, structured, and there's a lot of guidance. There's like best practices and ways to do things, and you know exactly what your career path looks like and what's expected of you. Versus going to a startup where it's the exact opposite. There's like no structure, no process. It's extremely informal, and actually there weren't. Most people in the company did not have a financial background. And then the when I joined, the finance function was in its very beginning stages. And so part of my job was actually to like build out the whole finance function that didn't exist before. And so it was a lot of ground up, like building out schedules, you know, building out proper financial statements, going through a first time audit, switching like accounting systems to one that made sense for the company, just like making sure that our books were in order and that everything was correct, and making sure people got paid on time and correctly. So it was a lot of
So it's
foundation
everything.
building.
It's like even like at HR, kind of like payroll, everything's getting built up.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's literally, so I had to do everything that you could possibly imagine that would vaguely touch
Finance at
finance.
all.
And so in a company, and because you're like wearing many different hats, it's like, okay, you could be part of like our finance team was super tiny, right? It's only a couple people. And so yeah, we're basically doing everything from the ground up. And so but as sort of those were kind of the early years, and it was really fun because we're a small team. You get a view of the entire business, and everybody that's working there, and everyone's super like motivated and driven. And it's like by nature the culture is very innovative because we're building something that doesn't exist before. And so it's like really exciting to be a part of that.
What a time to
And
be
then,
in e-learning, right? Like you were like that was before e-learning really took off. Like I feel like e-learning became a really popular industry to be in maybe like 4 years ago, 5 years ago,
it
like
was
2020.
so yeah, so I mean it was
So you
like
were early on.
it was quite like disruptive in terms of the product it was offering, because so really the main competitor of Top Hat is like Pearson Education, for example, right? So they publish physical textbooks, whereas like Top Hat digitizes all that so that university students can just show up with their phones or their laptop, and all of their content that they would ever need to learn is in Top Hat, like the software, right? So it's like basically a teaching tool for professors to engage with their students, and so everything just gets moved from physical textbooks, and written notes and physical like quizzes, all and it's all like digital and virtual. So that was kind of and then that wasn't when I was that this was like it was started in sort of after right after we graduated from university
Mhm.
around that time. So it was a relatively young company when I had joined, and that was like pretty revolutionary at the time because that didn't exist before. And now, of course, it's like much more common,
Mhm.
with everything going sort of digital and virtual.
Good. Okay, sorry. Um, what did I want to mention next? Okay, so one of the things that I think that at least from my conversations with our member base at CFI, whether it's going and attending office hours or being involved in the community, a lot of people think that finance, like getting a job in finance, means that you work at a financial institution, whether you work at a bank or a finance function in a major corporation like Amazon. It People think that there are lim- limited scope of opportunities. And I think it's so great to see, for example, with your career, how broad it can be. So, for example, you started in audit, but guess what? Like, if you have an interest in being at like the forefront of an industry that's just starting up or really revolutionizing something, like education, for example, all of these tools that you learn at like these like tools and skills that you developed at PwC are extremely relevant to going into really any industry. And then so at Top Hat, you were there. How many years were you there?
I was there for almost 6 years at Top Hat.
Okay. And then so after Top Hat, tell us where you've been since then. Like fill in the gap to where you are today.
Yeah, yeah. So I think as we tend to build up our experiences, um, there's like recruiters and companies that look for these skill sets. So sort of the more senior you become in your career, the more it's other people start to reach out to you versus you applying to jobs. And
Mhm.
that's what I sort of experience is because I had been a part of this startup growth journey. There's like a demand for that skill set, and so the opportunities that I was getting were related to that. And so my next opportunity after Top Hat was actually a CFO role with a Canadian startup that had just been acquired by a strategic acquirer. And so I was hired to help scale the business in North America. And so that was a step up for me, just in terms of like leadership skills, because I had never been, the head of finance person in any company, right? Because at Top Hat there was a CFO there already, and so joining this new company, I was the CFO, and so I would be building out a team, and I would be expected to lead the function as well as the business, along with the CEO. And so that was sort of my real like test and challenge to in terms of from a leadership perspective. And so leadership skills aren't skills that you can learn in school or just by reading a book. It comes with like years of practice and experience, and just like working with people like on your team, outside of your team. um, and really it takes experience to build that up, and it's like working with mentors, and like getting some formal training, but most of it is you're sort of learning through experience. And then so that was basically an opportunity that required me to exercise a muscle that I hadn't really exercised before. So that for me was a big step up, and then that was probably like a huge challenge. Like one of the biggest challenges for me in terms of a career move, because it wasn't like, okay, my technical skills didn't really matter at that point. I mean, it did. It's like, yeah, we know your technical stuff. That's not important, but we need to be able to see your leadership skills and the ability for you to make an impact on the company in that way.
And so something that I think is a lot of people certainly want recruiters to reach out to them, and it makes job searching a lot more, I think, enjoyable and passive in that you're at a job, you enjoy what you do, but it's always nice to be open to the idea to consider what's out there. And it's even better if it kind of like comes to your doorstep. For our members that are listening that don't necessarily have people reach out and wish they could have recruiters reaching out to them, what are some things that you might give them as like encouraging words of advice? For
Yeah.
example, do you always maintain your social profile and like LinkedIn? Like, how could you give advice to someone that maybe is hoping to develop their profile to a point where they're being reached out to?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, maintaining your LinkedIn profile is really important. That's like still where all the recruiting happens online. Like LinkedIn's like still the top platform where recruiters will reach out to you. And that's where actually I got all of my job opportunities after PwC. But I also in terms of like my job search journey and the people that I talked to as I was making career transitions, it's also through networking. So just making sure you stay in touch with your network, what your friends like from school, the people that you work with, because they can often make introductions to you for your future opportunities. And sometimes, they may go to a company that you're interested in. And so um, often it's much easier to get your foot in the door, get an interview at that company if you know somebody that works at that company. Like you can search your LinkedIn networks and say, okay, I'm this is the potential company that I want to work for, and then look in your LinkedIn. Does anybody that you know work there? Can they make an introduction? Because I've actually done that for people in my network. They've come to me and said, hey, I'm really interested in this role. Can you refer me? And then usually, if I'm referring them, they will get noticed in the pile of like hundreds or thousands of resumes that recruiting teams going through. So I think that's really important. And then there's sometimes there's like industry events. Some of them are sort of better than others, and so I think it's just like going to a couple of them, expanding your network, trying to meet people. That's what I did as well while I was at Top Hat and I was newer to the startup space. Is making connections to my peers so I can learn from them while I'm on the job, but also later, if I am looking to make a career transition, I can reach out to these people and see where they're at. So it's really, I think, about expanding your network and then maintaining your network, just seeing, keeping your eye on, okay, what are people up to these days as you're sort of thinking about your next job. So I think that that would really, really help in sort of building out your network. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've been involved in recruiting in your current role, but the importance of being able to maintain genuine, sincere connections with people, I think, is so important these days. Because, for example, with ChatGPT coming into play, one of the things that at least my husband has said at the engineering firm that he's at is all of a sudden everyone seems so great. Like all of these resumes, if we have like a senior developer role that we're hiring for, previously we would go through like a resume pile of, let's say, like 100 resumes, and we think like, nine of them are like very strong, have to meet this person. And they're all very uniquely different in the way that they write and the way that they present themselves. They seem very much like an individual person that's unique. But now, like fast forward, a couple of years, if you have a resume pile of 100 people applying to like a senior developer role, like at least 50 of those sound great. And they have that same polish to their resume, their cover letter. They all sound very similar. And it's because we have ChatGPT really making that an equal playing field. So I think now more than ever, it's incredibly important to maintain that like human interaction touch with when it comes to networking, being genuine, being sincere, and wanting to help others and receive before receiving that help for yourself.
Yeah.
Where are you at today? And what is your role like today?
Yeah, yeah. So today I am in the CFO of a company called commonsku. And so we're in sort of it's a software provider for the promotional products industry, so vertical SaaS. And again, I did receive this role through LinkedIn
Oh my gosh,
recruiter
if someone at
again.
LinkedIn is listening, they're gonna love you.
So so yeah, so I've been incredibly lucky And I think it's about taking advantage of the opportunities and making sure that you're ready to take on the opportunities. Because what I've noticed is that sometimes, people do get LinkedIn reach outs, but then they go through the interview actually and they're not a fit. So it's like just making sure you're responding back to the right opportunities, and then you're also being picky if there's a lot of recruiters reaching out to you, and then just making sure that the skill set match, it is a match, and then you actually want to work for that company. And because otherwise there could be a disconnect. So just because you get the reach out doesn't mean you're actually going to get the job. So I think just being ready for the opportunity, like developing your skills. So say like, in this case, if I knew I wanted to be the CFO, I made sure that I worked on my leadership skills even in my previous role. So it's like in my current role, how do I get experience with the skills that I need for my next role? And then just making sure to call out those particular experiences and using those as examples as they're interviewing you for your new role. So I think that was particularly helpful for me in getting this next job. Because right now, this company is like PE backed, and my last company was PE backed as well. So that experience was like really valuable because they wanted somebody that had experience working with PE investors, because there's a certain level of like rigor that's
In
required.
demand that, yeah, comes
Yes,
with that.
yeah, exactly. And then so just highlighting those skill sets, and then just throughout the interview process, showing them, okay, that I knew um, what I that I knew how to operate successfully in that context, and just understanding kind of their perspectives, because it was really the PE investor that a few of them interviewed me too in that interview process. So at this level, you do go through multiple rounds of interviews. It's like you talk to the company, like the CEO, of course, and then other management team members, but also the investor does get involved. And so you have to consider all these different perspectives. It's like, okay, what is this person looking for? The CEO is looking for a business partner. The investor is looking for somebody that has had experience in this kind of environment that they can work well with, and that knows how to scale a company. So I would say it's like it's also really helpful to look on the job boards for the next role that you want to have, and sort of reading them and seeing, okay, what are the specific skill sets or experiences that they're looking for, and just making sure, okay, how do I get those skills and experiences in my current job, or in some other way for me to get that next job, which I think is important too.
And then so I want to let's try and I want to find. Okay, wait. So there's many people out there that have a goal, of course, of wanting to be a CFO. And CFOs come from many different backgrounds, and especially like in different industries, it's very different. For example, if you're going to be a CFO at a major investment bank, you're probably going to have industry group experience, maybe capital markets. But if you're a CFO at, let's say, a Verizon, a large American telecom company, or a place like Top Hat or Common Skew, there are very different profiles. But for the person that is generally aspiring and says, just as the kid in university says, I'm going to be a lawyer one day. If someone is, 4 years into their career and says, my goal is ultimately to be a CFO, what is a key nugget of advice that you would give that person?
I think you need a breadth of experience, because all of us have to start from somewhere, right? So there's some CFOs that start the accounting route, and then there's others that actually start the investment banking route. So those are two of the most common routes that I see in terms of CFOs, right? And of course, as you move higher up, the more that industry experience does become really important. So, say, for example, in sort of the software space, it's very unlikely that they would hire somebody with no software experience for the CFO of a software company. So you need to, really, you need to be able to have like choose an industry that you're really interested in. Say, okay, I eventually want to be the CFO of this industry. And then there's certain industries that are similar enough where you can cross, and sort of just understand that, right? You can go and like now the internet is so available, information is so available to us. We can go and see, okay, who is the CFO at these companies that potentially I would like to be CFO at? What is their background and how did they get into this role? And what kinds of like previous experiences or companies have they worked at? So that's really to give you an idea of, okay, what sort of industry experience do I need? And then, of course, the breadth of experience. So, say if you are purely in a reporting role on the accounting side, so the big gap would be like the FP&A side, because that's a huge sort of part of the job. Like, you need to be able to do the planning, the forecasting, like the budgeting, and also just in general being able to provide forward looking insights that if you're just purely in a reporting role, that's just like a gap that you won't be able to fill. And so it's very unlikely that you know you'll get hired for a CFO role if you don't have that breadth of experience. And how you can get that is, say if you are, say, in a purely reporting role, you can ask for opportunities to participate in the budgeting or forecasting process, or in the business partnering process, where you can get that experience under your belt. Because I think the breadth becomes more important, because you don't have to, as you move higher up, there's less like sort of depth of experience that's required in any area, but you do have to have breadth. And so just making sure that you do have the breadth of experience, and noting where your gaps are, you just need to make sure you're able to address those, as you are sort of progressing in your career.
I wish I had this like access to this type of podcast when we were in university or like earlier on. Like this has been such an informative discussion, and I think that for anyone that has aspirations to be a CFO, because I know so many people do, but not everyone gets to that stage. This has been an incredibly informative session, so that you can plan. Like the idea is to be like really pragmatic, be really thoughtful about each career step that you take, and actively build out your skill set, like a briefcase, so to speak, of skills that you're building. Know which ones that you want to put into your portfolio next. Know which industry you want to focus on. So if you're becoming more and more focused about the career path you want to take, the skills that you want to develop, it becomes much more realistic with a proper plan. And so that has been probably the most like outcome oriented podcast that we've had. And so I hope for everyone that's listening, if you have aspirations to be a CFO one day, that this has been really helpful for your career planning. And until next time, I'll see you all later.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. FinPod is brought to you by Corporate Finance Institute, the #1 rated online provider of finance and banking training, certifications, and productivity tools.